Deep in the quiet valley of Ethelwood, nestled between the gentle, rolling slopes of two ancient mountains, there stood a small, circular house with a roof made of weathered copper shingles. In the soft light of the moon, these shingles did not shine with a harsh metallic glare, but instead glowed with a warm, comforting green, like the moss that clung to the roots of the nearby willow trees. This was the home of Alastair, a man of quiet steps and gentle words, who was known to the few who lived on the borders of the valley as the Keeper of Dreams. Alastair was an elderly man, though his age was not measured in years, but in the soft silver of his hair, which fell like starlight around his shoulders, and the deep, warm amber of his eyes, which held the calm of a forest at twilight. He wore a simple, long robe of deep indigo wool, embroidered at the hem with faint silver threads that traced the shapes of constellations long forgotten by the busy world beyond the hills. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the western ridges and the sky turned from a dusty rose to the deep, silent blue of night, Alastair would walk out onto his stone porch. He held a long wooden staff, carved from the branch of a fallen ash tree, and a small leather pouch that clung to his belt, filled with the seeds of lavender and wild chamomile. His work did not begin when the day started, but when the rest of the world closed its eyes and drifted into the quiet spaces of slumber. It was his task to watch over the sleep of the valley, to collect the stray thoughts, the unformed hopes, and the gentle dreams that drifted from the minds of the sleeping creatures like wisps of warm mist rising from a pond. In the basement of Alastair's circular home was a room that felt both vast and intimate. Its walls were lined with shelves carved directly into the earth, and upon these shelves sat hundreds of glass jars of every shape and size. Some were tall and slender, like frozen icicles, while others were round and wide, like plump pumpkins. Inside these jars, the dreams of the valley's inhabitants rested. They did not sit still, they drifted and swirled in soft, iridescent patterns of color. A dream of running through a field of wild clover might glow with a bright, vibrant emerald light, pulsing gently like a firefly. A dream of soaring high above the clouds on the back of a great bird would shimmer with the pale, clear blue of an autumn sky. The dreams of children were always the brightest, filled with splashes of gold, magenta, and warm peach, tumbling over one another in their eagerness to be remembered. Alastair tended to these jars with a mother's care, dusting them with a feather brush, sealing them with corks wrapped in wax, and ensuring that no cold draught or sudden shadow could disturb the warmth within. On this particular night, the moon rose high and round, casting a silver sheet over the meadows and turning the winding stream into a ribbon of liquid mercury. Alastair stood on his porch, breathing in the cool, damp air that smelled of pine needles and wet stones. He closed his eyes, listening to the familiar sounds of the night, the distant, rhythmic hoot of a horned owl, the soft rustle of the wind through the high grass, and the gentle gurgle of the water as it hurried over the smooth pebbles of the brook. But as the hours wore on and the moon reached its highest point in the sky, Alastair felt a subtle change in the air. The gentle warmth that usually drifted down from the hills, a warmth born from the collective peace of hundreds of sleeping creatures, began to cool. A strange, heavy silence settled over the trees, a silence that did not feel like peaceful rest, but like an empty void. He opened his amber eyes and looked up at the sky. The stars were there, shining like diamonds on dark velvet, but they seemed distant, their light thin and cold. When he walked down the stone steps of his porch and ventured into the meadow, he did not find the usual drifting wisps of dreams. The air was clear, too clear, empty of the soft, colorful fragments that usually floated through the night. Alastair held out his hand, palm upward, waiting for even a single spark of amber or a trace of violet light to land on his skin, but nothing came. He walked toward the edge of the whispering woods, where the wild rabbits and the white-tailed deer slept beneath the canopy of ancient oaks. He peered into the shadows, but there was no glow, no gentle pulsing of light from the hollows of the trees or the soft burrows in the earth. The animals were asleep, but their sleep was heavy, gray, and dreamless. Alistair knew then that something had gone terribly wrong. Without dreams, the sleep of living things was merely a long, cold dark, a rest that brought no comfort, no healing, and no joy to the waking mind. The dreams were the threads that connected the spirit to the magic of the earth, and without them, the world would slowly grow weary and cold. He turned his steps toward the northern ridge, where the high cliffs met the sky, for he knew that the dreams were woven by an ancient and gentle entity known as the Great Weaver. The Great Weaver lived in a cavern of starlight at the very top of the mountain ridge. She was an ancient, spider-like spirit, but she was not a creature of fear. She was made of soft, silvery mist and starlight, with 8 long, delicate legs that moved across her loom with the grace of a harpist's fingers. For centuries, she had sat at her loom, taking the raw, unformed thoughts of the world and weaving them into the beautiful tapestries of dreams that Alistair then collected and distributed. But as Alistair climbed the winding, rocky path toward her cavern, he could see that the peak of the mountain was dark. The soft, pearlescent glow that usually crowned the ridge had vanished, replaced by the same cold, heavy shadow that lay over the valley. When he reached the mouth of the cavern, he stopped. The cave was silent, save for the faint, crystalline sound of water dripping from the ceiling onto the stone floor. Inside, the great loom stood, its wooden frame carved from the oldest cedar trees, but the threads hung loose and limp, like cobwebs in an abandoned barn. In the center of the cavern sat the Great Weaver. Her form, usually bright and shimmering with the colors of the aurora, was now a dull, translucent gray. She bowed her head, her many eyes dark and sorrowful. Alistair stepped softly into the cave, his wooden staff making a gentle tap against the stone. He did not speak immediately, knowing that in the presence of great sorrow, silence is often the kindest companion. He knelt beside the ancient spirit, placing a warm hand upon one of her soft, misty legs. The gray mist of her body swirled slightly at his touch, a faint spark of blue returning to her form. After a long moment, the Great Weaver spoke, her voice sounding like the whisper of dry autumn leaves sliding across a frozen lake. She told him that while she was preparing to weave the midnight dreams, a sudden, cold wind had swept through the cavern, a wind blown from the deep valleys of the north where the shadows grow long. In her surprise, her fingers had slipped, and the golden shuttle, the ancient tool she used to pass the threads of starlight through the warp of the loom, had fallen from her grasp. It had tumbled down into the dark crevices of the mountain, lost in the deep, winding fissures where the light of the stars could not reach. Without the golden shuttle, she could not weave the dreams. The threads of light remained raw and unspun, and the world was left to sleep in the dark. Alistair nodded slowly, his heart filled with a quiet determination. He told the weaver that he would find the shuttle. He had spent his life tending to the dreams of others, and he would not let the world lose its light to the cold dark of a dreamless night. He stood up, adjusting his indigo robe and securing the leather pouch at his belt. With his ash staff in his hand and the hope of the valley in his heart, he turned back toward the entrance of the cave and began his descent into the darkness. His journey would first take him through the whispering woods, a dense forest where the trees were so old that their roots had grown together into a great, wooden floor covered in moss. The path was barely visible under the thick canopy of leaves, and the cold, dreamless silence made the forest feel larger and more mysterious than usual. As Alistair walked, the dry leaves crunched beneath his boots, a lonely sound in the quiet woods. He had not gone far when he heard a soft, rhythmic clicking sound from the branches above. He stopped and raised his staff, the faint silver embroidery on his sleeve catching the dim light of the distant stars. From the hollow of an ancient oak, a pair of large, round yellow eyes peered down at him. A small, plump owl with feathers the color of dried bark drifted down from the branch, landing on a mossy root near the path. The owl wore a pair of tiny, round reading glasses perched precariously on its curved beak, and its head tilted from side to side as it looked at Alistair. The owl spoke, introducing himself as Barnaby. His voice was a low, comforting rumble, like the sound of a sleeping cat. Barnaby asked Alistair why he walked the forest paths when the rest of the world was tucked away in their beds. Alistair explained his quest, telling the owl of the great weaver's lost shuttle and the dreamless sleep that had fallen over the land. Barnaby listened quietly, his yellow eyes blinking behind his glasses. He nodded slowly, his feathers rustling. He told Alistair that he had seen a flash of gold falling through the sky earlier that evening, landing somewhere near the Mirror Lake, deep in the heart of the forest. But the way to the lake was difficult, especially now that the mist of the dreamless night had rolled in, thick and disorienting, turning the familiar paths into a maze of shadows. Alistair thanked the owl and asked if he would guide him. Barnaby agreed, spreading his wide, silent wings and lifting off from the mossy root. He did not fly high above the trees, but drifted slowly from branch to branch just ahead of Alistair, his white underfeathers acting as a beacon in the gloom. Together, they moved deeper into the whispering woods. The air grew colder, and the mist began to rise from the damp earth, twisting around the trunks of the trees like white fingers. It was a heavy, damp fog that muffled the sound of their movements and hid the path ahead, but Alistair followed the soft, silent shape of the owl, trust guiding his steps where his eyes could not see. As they walked, Alistair spoke to Barnaby about the nature of the forest. He learned that the trees themselves were feeling the lack of dreams. Their leaves hung limp, and the soft, humming energy that usually ran through their roots had gone silent. The forest was holding its breath, waiting for the return of the light. After what seemed like hours of walking through the muffled gray world, the trees began to thin, and the ground beneath Alistair's boots transitioned from soft moss to smooth, flat stones. Before them lay the Mirror Lake. In the daylight, the lake was a beautiful, clear expanse of blue water, but tonight it looked like a sheet of dark glass, perfectly still and reflecting the starry sky with such clarity that it was hard to tell where the earth ended and the heavens began. The mist hung in thick wreaths around the edges of the water, but the center of the lake was clear. Alistair walked to the edge of the water and knelt down, his staff resting across his knees. He looked into the dark pool, expecting to see his own reflection, but the surface of the water did not show his face. Instead, it showed a series of soft, glowing images that shifted and merged like paint in water. He saw a young girl laughing as she chased a yellow butterfly through a summer meadow. He saw an old man sitting by a warm hearth, holding the hand of his companion. He saw a small seedling pushing its way through the dark soil toward the warm sun. These were the memories of the world, stored in the quiet depths of the lake. Suddenly, the water in the center of the lake began to ripple, the rings of movement spreading outward until they touched the stony shore at Alistair's feet. A figure rose from the water, made of liquid starlight and pale blue foam. It was the water spirit of the lake, a gentle entity who guarded the memories of the land. The spirit's eyes were like deep pools of water, and her hair flowed behind her like liquid silk. She spoke, her voice like the sound of gentle waves lapping against a sandy shore. She knew of Alistair's quest, for the lake had felt the absence of the dreams that usually fell upon its surface like gentle rain. She told him that the golden shuttle had indeed fallen into the lake, but it had slipped through the water and into the Spire of Whispers, an ancient stone structure that rose from the deepest part of the lake, its entrance hidden beneath the waves. To reach it, Alistair would need to cross the lake, but the water was deep, and no boat could float upon its magic tonight, for the dreamless cold had made the water heavy and still. Alistair looked at the wide expanse of water, his brow furrowing. He had no boat, and his old limbs were not suited for swimming through the cold depths of the lake. Barnaby landed on a nearby rock, his feathers ruffled against the chill. He suggested that they ask the spirit for aid, for the spirits of the water were known to be kind to those who sought to restore balance to the world. The water spirit smiled, a sound like glass chimes in the wind. She reached out her hand, and from the depths of the lake, a path of smooth, glowing stones began to rise, breaking the surface of the water one by one until they formed a bridge that stretched from the shore to the center of the lake where the Spire of Whispers stood. The stones glowed with a soft, warm amber light, casting a path of safety through the dark water. Alistair thanked the spirit and began to walk across the stone bridge. Each step he took felt light, as if the magic of the stones was lifting the weariness from his bones. Barnaby flew ahead, his sharp eyes scanning the dark water for any sign of danger, but the lake remained peaceful, its surface undisturbed. In the center of the lake, the stone bridge led to a small, circular island of white rock. In the middle of the island stood the Spire of Whispers, a tall, slender tower made of pale stone that seemed to have been carved from a single piece of marble. The tower had no doors or windows, only a winding staircase that spiraled around the outside, disappearing into the low-hanging clouds above. As Alistair stepped onto the island, he heard a soft, musical sound, like the humming of a lullaby. It came from a small creature sitting at the base of the staircase. The creature looked like a fox, but its fur was the color of the night sky, dark indigo and peppered with tiny, sparkling stars. Its tail was long and fluffy, ending in a soft glow that looked like a fallen star. This was Lumina, the starry fox, a creature that lived in the high places of the world and carried the light of the first stars in her tail. Lumina looked up as Alistair approached, her star-like eyes glowing with curiosity. She stopped her humming and stood up, her tail brushing against the white rock of the island and leaving a trail of sparkling dust behind. She spoke, her voice light and melodic, like the sound of a flute. She told Alistair that she had been watching the golden shuttle as it fell from the mountain. It had not fallen into the water, but had been caught by the wind and carried to the top of the Spire of Whispers, where it now rested in a nest of soft, cloud-spun wool that the wind had gathered there. But the climb up the spire was long, and the steps were narrow and steep, slippery with the dew of the dreamless night. Alistair looked up at the winding staircase, which seemed to stretch indefinitely into the dark sky. He was tired from his journey, and his knees ached from the climb up the mountain and the walk through the woods, but he knew he could not stop now. He took a deep breath, tightening his grip on his ash staff, and stepped onto the first stone of the staircase. Lumina trotted ahead of him, her glowing tail lighting the path and casting a warm, comforting light onto the cold white stone. Barnaby flew beside them, keeping a watchful eye on the dark sky. The climb was slow and silent. As they rose higher, the lake below grew smaller, until it looked like a dark, polished gem set in the green velvet of the forest. The wind began to blow, cold and sharp, tugging at Alistair's indigo robe and whistling through the carvings of the spire. But Lumina's light remained steady, a warm beacon that kept the cold shadow at bay. Halfway up the spire, Alistair felt his strength beginning to fail. His breath came short, and his legs felt heavy, like lead. He stopped, leaning heavily on his staff and closing his eyes. The silence around him felt oppressive, whispering of failure and the endless, dreamless dark that would consume the valley if he could not reach the top. But then, he felt a soft warmth against his hand. He opened his eyes and saw Lumina resting her head against his knee, her starry eyes looking up at him with a quiet trust. Barnaby landed on his shoulder, his warm feathers pressing against Alistair's neck. The small owl gave a soft, reassuring hoot, a sound that carried the warmth of a cozy nest and the quiet peace of a safe home. Alistair smiled, his heart filled with a renewed strength. He realized that he was not alone in his quest, the creatures of the valley were with him, and their hope was the fuel that would carry him to the top. With a final, determined effort, Alistair resumed the climb. The steps grew narrower, and the wind blew stronger, but he did not look down. He focused on the glowing tail of the starry fox and the steady beat of the owl's wings beside him. Finally, the staircase ended, and they stepped onto a flat platform at the very top of the spire. The platform was surrounded by a low wall of white stone, and in the center sat a large, soft nest made of white clouds that had drifted too close to the tower and become tangled in its stone carvings. The cloud wall was soft and glowing with a faint, iridescent light. Alistair walked to the nest and peered inside. There, nestled in the center of the soft, white wool, lay the golden shuttle. It was a beautiful object, made of solid gold and carved with intricate runes of peace and sleep. It glowed with a warm, steady light that seemed to pulse in time with the heartbeat of the earth. Alistair reached out and lifted the shuttle from the nest. The gold felt warm in his hand, and as his fingers closed around it, a wave of gentle energy swept through his body, washing away the fatigue of the climb and filling him with a deep sense of peace. The silver threads on his indigo robe began to glow, reflecting the warm light of the shuttle. Lumina gave a happy bark, her tail spinning in circles and sending a shower of stardust into the night air. Barnaby hooted softly, his yellow eyes bright with joy. Alistair held the shuttle close, knowing that their task was only half complete. They now had to return the shuttle to the Great Weaver so that she could begin her work once more. The descent from the spire was much faster, the path of stones across the lake remaining open to guide them back to the shore. As they walked through the whispering woods, the mist began to thin, parting before the warm light of the golden shuttle. The forest trees seemed to sigh in relief as they passed, their leaves rustling with a gentle, waking energy. When they reached the foot of the mountain, Alistair thanked Barnaby and Lumina for their help. The owl and the fox had done their part, and the final climb to the cavern was one Alistair had to make alone, to return the shuttle to the Weaver of Dreams. Barnaby gave a final, parting hoot and flew back into the safety of the woods, while Lumina curled up on a mossy stone at the edge of the path, her tail glowing like a lantern to watch him go. Alistair climbed the rocky path once more. The wind had died down, and the mountain air was still and cool. When he entered the cavern of starlight, he found the Great Weaver sitting in the same dark corner, her form still gray and lifeless. Alistair walked forward and held out his hand, palm up, the golden shuttle resting upon it. The cavern was suddenly filled with a warm, golden light that banished the shadows and illuminated the cedar frame of the great loom. The weaver raised her head, her dark eyes reflecting the sudden glow. A soft, musical hum rose from her throat, a sound of profound relief and joy. She reached out a delicate, misty leg and took the shuttle from Alistair's hand. As soon as the gold touched her fingers, her body began to shimmer, the dull gray mist turning into a vibrant, swirling pattern of starlight, blue, violet, and gold. Her eyes sparkled like stars, and her 8 legs moved with a renewed, energetic grace. She turned to the loom, taking a thread of raw starlight from a basket of cloud wool and threading it through the golden shuttle. With a swift, fluid motion, she began to pass the shuttle through the warp of the loom. The sound of the loom filled the cavern, a rhythmic, soothing click-clack that sounded like the heartbeat of the sleeping world. As she wove, the threads of starlight began to shimmer with 1,000 different colors. The tapestries of dreams began to form, flowing from the loom like a river of light. They were dreams of fields of wild flowers, of soaring above the clouds, of warm hearts and laughter, and of the quiet, peaceful dark. The dreams drifted out of the mouth of the cavern, floating down the mountainside and into the valley below. Alistair watched as the light returned to the land. The cold, heavy shadow was swept away, replaced by the soft, warm glow of 1,000 dreams. He could feel the energy of the valley rising, a gentle, peaceful warmth that filled the night air. The animals in their burrows, the birds in their nests, and the people in their homes began to breathe more deeply, their sleep now filled with the comfort and healing of the dreams. He walked down the mountain for the last time, his heart light and his body weary but content. When he reached his circular house, he went down into the basement room. The glass jars on the shelves were glowing once more, their lights swirling in beautiful, harmonious patterns. The green, blue, gold, and magenta lights danced together, casting a soft, warm glow upon the earth-carved walls. Alistair walked to the shelf and placed a small, empty jar in the center of the middle shelf. He took a deep breath, and as he exhaled, a small wisp of warm, golden light drifted from his lips and into the jar. It was the dream of a gentle journey, of friendship in the dark, and of the return of light to a weary world. He sealed the jar with a wax-wrapped cork and placed it gently on the shelf. He then walked up the stairs to his bedroom, his indigo robe heavy with the dew of the night. He lay down upon his bed, his silver hair spread across the soft pillow. As he closed his amber eyes, he listened to the familiar sounds of the night, now filled with the gentle, humming energy of a dreaming world. The keeper of dreams slept at last, his own dreams a tapestry of starlight and peace, woven by the hand of the great weaver and guarded by the quiet valley he loved. The moon continued its journey across the sky, casting its silver light over the copper roof of the circular house, which glowed with a warm, green comfort in the quiet night. The stream flowed gently over the smooth stones, its song a lullaby for the sleeping valley, where every creature rested in the warmth of a dream, safe in the knowledge that the keeper of dreams was watching, and the light would always return. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the old willow tree, a soft, dry whisper that carried the memories of the journey through the forest. The owl Barnaby sat in his oak tree, his reading glasses tucked away, his eyes closed as he dreamed of flying through a sky made of starlight. Lumina, the starry fox, lay curled on her mossy stone, her tail a soft, pulsing light that kept the shadows at bay, her mind filled with the memory of the golden shuttle and the warmth of Alistair's hand. And so the valley slept, wrapped in the tapestry of dreams, peaceful and still. The mountain peaks stood silent against the starry sky, their ancient stones holding the memory of the night's magic, a magic that would live on in the stories told by the hearts and the dreams dreamed in the quiet hours of the night. The copper shingles of the house on the hill slowly lost their silver sheen as the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pale rose and gold. The long night was over, and the world was ready to wake, refreshed and healed by the dreams that had filled the dark. Alistair's eyes would open to the light of a new day, his heart ready for another night's work, another night of gathering the light and guarding the peace of the valley. But for now, he rested, a gentle soul in a gentle world, dreaming of the stars and the endless, beautiful tapestry of life. The morning light crept slowly down the slopes of the mountains, touching the treetops of the whispering woods and making the dew on the leaves sparkle like diamonds. The mirror lake reflected the pale blue of the early morning sky, its surface calm and clear, the path of stones now hidden deep beneath the water. The valley was waking up. A young rabbit poked its nose out of its burrow, sniffing the fresh, damp air, its eyes bright and full of life. A child in a farmhouse at the edge of the woods woke with a smile, remembering a dream of a golden butterfly that had led her through a meadow of clover. The weariness of the world had vanished, replaced by the energy of a new day. Alistair's circular house remained quiet, the copper roof now a soft green in the daylight. Inside, the jars on the shelves slept, their lights dim in the brightness of the sun, waiting for the night to return when they would shine again. Alistair lay peaceful in his bed, a soft smile on his face, the dream of his journey still fresh in his mind. He had kept his promise, he had saved the dreams, and the world was whole once more. The day would pass with its usual quiet rhythm, the wind would blow, the stream would run, and Alistair would prepare his jars and his staff for the night. For he was the keeper of dreams, and as long as he watched, the night would never be empty, and the world would always have a light to guide it through the dark.